My name is Eudes. Today I'm going to talk about Angular providers, so dependency injection in Angular. And I could talk about why you want to use providers for about 2 hours, but I'm pretty sure the organizers wouldn't be very happy with that. So I'm going to mostly be talking about the how, and we're going to go over every single way to declare a provider. But to go quickly over the why, so providers are something that you can share across components. And by sharing that, they can be useful if, for instance, you want to hold state that's common to several components. You just put it in a service and share it for the components. It can also allow components to communicate. Typically, observable is a good pattern for that. And finally, even if your service or provider is only declared for one component, it can still be very useful to just extract reusable logic, because the service would just be simply a vanilla TypeScript class. So if you ever move to React or Vue after, that's a whole class you don't have to rewrite. You just reuse it directly. So when I do technical talks, I like using very silly but grounded examples so that everyone can really see what's happening. And so for this talk, I had to think for a while because I needed an example of something that there would be one of, that would be shared by everyone, that would be passed around. At one point, I had a pretty good idea. My manager told me to keep this legal, so we're going to stick to something a little bit more traditional. So just drinks. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to use those two components, so I just want you to get familiar with them. They're very simple. I'll explain them. And then we're just going to write variations of these over and over and over to see every single way of declaring a provider. So the first one is a party component. So it's just a party at my house, so there's my house displayed here. And the content is where the guests are going to go. You could just put the guests in here. I just use this here, ng content. And then finally, I added this little div, the supply, which will just show all the drinks available for all the guests, okay? And you can notice this component requests a drinks class in the constructor, so that's going to be the service that we're going to share and declare in various ways. And then the other component is the guest component. They're also very simple. All they do is come at my house, help themselves to a drink, and then display that. That's really all there is to it. So we have those two components, and we have that drinks class here. So what is that drinks class? It's just this. So for my party, I'm just providing a 6-pack. So that's 6 beers here. They're not in bottles, they're in glasses because we're not savages. And it just offers a help yourself method. You call help yourself on the drinks service, and it gives you a beer and removes it from the supply. Okay? So very simple one. Now, how do I make that drinks class, that drink service, available to all the guests at the party? Well, the first and the simplest way is just to declare a provider on my party component. And so I do this with that providers property here. Just give it an array, because it could be any number of providers. I tell it, provide the drinks. And so what Angular will do when someone asks for the drink service, it will instantiate it and then give it to them. And that service, that instance, is going to be shared by everyone. So first, we can see everyone came to the house, everyone had a beer, they have beers, everything is fine. And of course, because the service is shared and it's the same instance, we have 2 beers left. Simple beer math, straightforward. Now, if you come to my house, it might not always be like that. It might be more of a bring your own beer situation. If it is, as you can see, the party component doesn't provide drinks anymore. It doesn't have the provider. So for a bring your own beer party, people will have to provide drinks themselves. Okay, so if each guest provides drinks using the provider's declaration, then it works fine. Everyone will come to the party and have a beer. How many beers do we have left? 20. That's more of my kind of party too, by the way. Sounds like way more fun. So we have 20 beer because every guest declared a drinks provider, which, remember, contains 6 beers. And so every time a guest came in, they came in with a brand new pack of beer, and total is 24 beers in that case. Okay, so what matters here is that the drinks service instantiation is tied to whoever declares it. We have 4 guests, 4 creations of guest components, so we have 4 creations of drinks service. Okay, so now that we know the drink service, the service is tied to whoever declares it, we'll go to the actual simple example that Angular uses generating in the first place. If you do the tutorial, that's the first one you'll see. But I liked starting with the party because it was more straightforward. Because this one is, we don't provide the beers in the party anymore. We provide them in the ng module. Remember, we said where you declare the provider determines how many times that service is going to be instantiated. So here, the difference between when we declared the providers in the party and when we declare them in the module is that if I have several parties, there is only a single module, so I'll have a single service that will be shared across parties. So we can see that, we can try that. Have my party, and the way I can test if I have more than one party is simply to just party every night. So I start on the first night, everyone's here, everyone has a beer, and I have 2 beers left from the pack. So far, so good. The next day, I'm going to work, come back at night, invite the same people over, but I only had 2 beers left, which means I have 2 pretty angry guests at that point. Again, what happened here is that the drinks provider being declared in the module is instantiated a single time by the entire application. So all the parties and all the guests share a single pack of beer. If I were to declare it in the party again, then every time I have a new party, I have a new drinks provider, so a new pack of beer, which is probably more the behavior you would want. So to sum up what we just saw, Angular dependency injection is hierarchical. It's a tree. We have the ng module at the top, and then any component, if the ng module declares a provider, any component inside of that will have access to that provider. No matter how deep it is, if it asks for the drink service, it will be able to get it. But as we can see, there's a single ng module. So all the parties would share the same instance of the service declared in the module. Then if you declare it in the module, then every party has its own service. Because it's hierarchical, every guest would have access to the service too, but every party would have its separate instance of that service. And then finally, you could move it all the way down to the guests, in which case every single guest would create the service themselves, and that service would not be available here, for instance, to the party, only to the guests. One thing that we can ask here is, this is good. I know depending on the level how many instances of that service I get, but what if I declare it both at the module level and the party level, or both at the party level and at the guest level? Well, you can reverse the graph. When a guest asks for the drink service, it'll look at itself, at the guest itself, and say, do you have drinks? If you don't, then it'll go up a level. It'll ask the party, do you have drinks? If it doesn't, then it'll go up a level again and ask the ng module. And it stops as soon as it finds one. So if we have it at the module and at the party level, it will stop at the party level and never ask the module. It'll just use the lowest one it can find that provides whatever service it's looking for. Okay? We'll see that as an example in a minute, but before we can see that, Angular provides tons of syntactic sugar over its API, and this is one of those cases. So before I can actually show a good example of declaring the provider in 2 levels, I have to point this out that this string syntax for providers is just syntactic sugar in Angular. It's the equivalent of using that expanded syntax here with the provide and the use class. This provide and use class reads as, when someone asks for the drinks class, that's the provide, then give them a new instance of the drinks class, okay? If I were to use A and B, if someone is asking for A, use a new instance of the class B. That's how you have to read that. The provide is just what are people asking for, and the use class is how do I give it to them. So we have this. Let's go back to still examples, because it's easier to visualize. When you throw a party, there's often that guy. That guy is just like everyone else. same exact implementation. He comes in, asks for drinks, helps himself, and exact same implementation as all the other guests. But the difference is that guy brings his own bottle of wine and he's probably not sharing it with anyone. So how does he do that? Well, he's going to use the syntax we just saw. He's going to say, at his level, I'm going to provide drinks, but I'm just going to use the class wine. So if I'm asking for drinks, give me, just instantiate the wine class and give that to me. And so if you do that, it will override the party declaring drinks too. And what you get is exactly what you expect. Everyone gets beers because they're asking the party, but he will not go all the way up to the party. He'll stop at himself, ask for drinks, see that he has wine, and just drink that. And as you can see, we still have 3 beers left because everyone is still sharing the other provider. So that's how you can override an existing provider higher up in the hierarchy by just redeclaring it, and potentially with another class if you like a better one. But that's not the worst case for that guy. There's an even worse version of that guy. He's the guy that comes in, asks for wine, but doesn't bring it. So you just have beer. He comes in and just asking for wine. How do you solve that? You only have beer. Well, you can solve that. You can just tell him it's a foamy yellow wine and don't worry about it, everything's fine. So we could do exactly what we saw here. If someone is asking for wine, just give them a drinks instance. The problem with the use class is that we just saw it creates a new one. It tells Angular, when someone asks for wine, give them a new instance of the drinks class. So if we were to do this, he would get his own pack of beers. Everyone would share the same pack, and he would get a brand new one just for him. That's not what we want. So how do we reuse the existing drinks provider so that he shares the same pack as everyone? Well, we just said it, existing. Angular offers a way to declare that by saying, when someone asks for wine, just reuse the existing drinks provider. And so when we do that, he gets a beer, just like everyone, and we only have 2 left because he really got it from the same pack as everyone. Okay? So use class, use existing. Use class lets you reinstantiate a new one of that class every time someone is asking, or not every time, but you will create a new instance no matter if you declared it before or not. Whereas the use existing just says, just reuse the existing instance. I really want it to be a singleton and shared across everyone. So, so this is, we saw the 2 ways that we can mess with a hierarchical dependency injection by overriding it at different levels. So far, we've only seen sharing classes, the drinks service, the wine service. In real-life applications, sometimes you don't want to share a service. Sometimes that's way overkill. Typical examples you can see around are, I have an endpoint that I'm talking to. I want that to be in a single place in my whole app because I want easily to switch it between production and development or staging environments, whatever it is. So when I'm sharing that, the endpoint is just a string, right? I don't want a full class for this. So how can I share just a string? Well, we have to go back to stupid examples. What kind of string could we share here? So let's say I'm an absolutely terrible host. I'm not providing drinks for anyone. If they come to my party, I'll just tell them a joke and be done with it. So how do I tell them how do I tell Angular that I just want to share a provider that's a string, nothing else, no class, nothing? So Angular lets you declare injection tokens. And notice this injection token has a type parameter in TypeScript here, that type string. What it tells Angular and TypeScript is, if I'm using this token, I'm declaring a service that's just going to be a string, and when someone asks for it, you're just going to inject a string. It's not a class, it's just a string. You could absolutely have a number here instead of that string type parameter, or an object, or anything you want. For simplicity here, I'm using a string. Sometimes, yes, you'll share just an object singleton, or just some JSON object hard-coded. So I have my injection token. How do I declare my provider now? Remember the provide use class or provide use existing syntax. Now we're going to use provide and use value. So provide is going to take the token we just declared, because we can't say provide a string. We might be providing many different string services. So we're just going to use our token, provide that token, and then we're just going to use the value of that string that we want to share. Here would go, for instance, your API endpoint. The URL of your endpoint. So you can share this. It could be an object, the use value, it could be a number. Here we said we share a string, So I declared my provider here. Okay, I actually declared it separately because for simplicity, I don't want to inline all of this in my components metadata. So now that I have my joke provider, I can just declare it like this. Providers, I have my joke provider. So there you go. I just declared a service that is just a string with that provider. How do I request it if I'm a guest? I can't just inject a string in my constructor. This time, I have to use an explicit annotation in Angular, the @inject one, okay? And then just tell Angular, here you inject the service that's associated with the joke token. And because it's type parametered and all that, TypeScript knows, oh yes, that's going to be a string. Again, if we didn't have that @inject, Angular would not know what string to inject here. And so once we have this, every guest has access to that string and can do whatever they want with it. Laugh, not laugh. Generally, that's the reaction I get when I tell a joke, but you might get different results. So this is how you share a simple string. So we've seen classes. We've seen what if I just want to share a number or a string. But there is the third case. What if I want to share something that's more complex than just a class? What if I have to perform complex actions before I can even give the service? Well, if some of you did some Angular 1, maybe you remember factory, which is the scary word most of the time for the complex case. So here, Angular still lets us use factories for providers. That's a more complex case, so we're going to go step by step. So for our example, let's just say that I'm not just providing a 6-pack of beer. I want to make some fancy drinks before people come over and then serve that. Because emojis are still pretty limited, I have to go with fruit punch. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I don't have any other emojis available. So here, we got a fruit punch factory. Okay, I'm just following a complex recipe, and then I'm giving that to the drink service, saying, just serve this. Why don't I want that recipe and that whole process as part of the drink service? It's typical separation of concerns. My drink service is simply here to let people help themselves and know what's left. So I have this factory. How do I declare it for Angular? Well, we saw the provide use class, the provide use existing, the provide use value. As you would expect, there's a provide use factory. Okay, so we tell Angular to provide drinks, and again, it's because we're returning drinks from that factory, a drinks service. Okay, so we can go back to using a simple class instead of an actual token. So we say when someone asks for drinks, use the factory to build that service, and then you give that result to them. So whatever the factory returns is the one that you're going to share with everyone. So we just declare it as a drinks provider here in the party component. And so every time I have a new party and someone asks for drink, or every time I have a new party, Angular will run the factory, get the result, and say whenever someone asks for drinks, I'm going to give them that. And so this is exactly what happens. Made fruit punch, everyone asks for fruit punch, and that's what they get. So obviously something went horribly wrong here. It's pretty obvious. I tried to wing the recipe. Clearly didn't work, so I should probably just follow a known recipe that will work better. So what does that mean? All right, simply my factory needs to receive a recipe book, and I'm just going to follow one of those recipes and use that. Okay? Turns out that recipe book is some other provider or third party something. It's another provider. Here, for simplicity, I put it in the party component. Remember what we said. Every party is not going to have a brand new recipe book, so logically it should probably be somewhere in the module. But for the purpose here, just for simplicity, I'm declaring it in the party. So what I have is I have a factory that I want to use to declare a provider. I have another service, and I want my factory to depend on that second service. How do I do that? right now Angular is just going to call the factory with no arguments and everything's going to crash. Well, because factory is a more complex case, it actually accepts a third parameter when you declare the provider, which is a dependencies array. So that array here needs to match exactly the arguments that your factory is expecting. And what it tells Angular is, you know what, my factory that I'm giving you to declare a provider, please treat it like any constructor of a component. You're going to do dependency injection on it. If it's asking for a recipe book as an argument, then you are going to use dependency injection, get that recipe book, and give it to the factory to try and get the actual instance of the service. And so by doing this, all of our factories can now suddenly depend on other services and use dependency injection, and we don't have to wire everything manually. And when we do that, then everyone actually gets good fruit punch. Okay? So I do realize these last two examples of factories are way more complex than the previous ones we saw, and I had to go pretty fast over them. If you do have questions after, I think there's a little time for questions, or just come see me after, and I'll be happy to answer questions you may have. So you now know every single way of declaring a provider in Angular, so you can probably go treat yourself to a beer, maybe after Nir's talk. I'm not sure what he thinks. And I want to point out every single one of these examples is actually a live example. There's a stack blitz. You just go on stack blitz, use them, put a little router and everything, so you can see the different examples, see the code, play with them, modify them, try your own things, and so just take a picture of the link and go try it out yourself. Thank you.